For the homework for tonight, you're going to watch this video and learn how to use a feature in your calculator. And I'll walk you through the first page, and then most of the slides will be showing you how to use your calculator. So pause the video now and get your calculator ready. The other thing that you might want is the Unit E free response packet that you have. We're going to use number 7 on the free response packet to learn how to use our calculator. So the free response number 7 has the equation x yields 2y plus z. So this is the equation that we're working with. Now, on this problem, this is an integrated rate law problem, which means that you're going to get a table of data that is time and concentration of the reactant. And in these problems, we will only have one reactant. So you only have to worry about one reactant. So if we were doing our differential rate law would equal K times the concentration of X raised to some power, the order. So I'll call that A. Okay, so if I go down here, remember that with the integrated rate law, we're only going to have one reactant. You will never have to worry about the order of reactions with respect to more than one reactant. So we're only going to have to worry about one reactant and its order. You still have a rate constant. Okay, so what happens is instead of it being 2 or 3 different experiments that we compare, in this case, we have one experiment. So this is one experiment, and we're watching that experiment over the course of time. So at 0 minutes, at 10 minutes, at 20 minutes, at 30 minutes, at 50 minutes. And we're measuring what is the concentration of the amount of the reactant at each of those times. Now, don't worry about these last 2 columns yet. We're going to deal with those in a minute. But those don't have anything to do with the products. There's nothing in this table that has to do with the products. So we're looking at the time and the amount of reactant. Okay, so if I scroll down a little bit, how do we find the order of the reaction when we're given a table of data like this? Okay, well, the first thing is you're going to check and you're going to see if when I graph the concentration of X versus time. So what does that mean? That means that the graph would be the concentration of X would be on the y-axis and time would be on the x-axis. Now we know that the X is a reactant, so if I start at some initial amount, I'd go down. Now if this graph is linear, then you have a 0 order. Okay, so if the concentration of X versus time is linear, then the order of the reaction is 0, right? So then we put the 0 in for the exponent. But remember that anything raised to the 0, X to the 0 is just 1. And so that becomes the rate is equal to K. Okay, so that would be the differential rate law. If we take that data and we plug it into our calculator and it's linear, or we plot it and it's linear. So what I want to do is I want to teach you how to use your calculator to plug this data in and do it very quickly. Okay. Now, what happens if it's not linear? So number 2, the graph, the X versus time is not linear. If that's the case, then we have to create 2 other graphs to determine which one is linear. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a graph that is the natural log of the concentration. And you don't have a lot of experience yet with this natural log, so we're going to just use it and not quite understand it yet, versus time. Now it's funny, this graph ends up being all in the 4th quadrant, so we're going to have to make sure that we can see in our window. Now if this graph is linear, then that's going to be a first order reaction, right? So we would have K times the concentration of X raised to the 1. If that's not linear, then we're going to graph 1 over X versus time. And it turns out that this would have a shape that looks like this, and this axis would be 1 over the concentration of X and time. And if this graph is linear, then our rate is second order. And so that's how we can figure out the rate of our reaction, the rate law of our reaction using time data. Okay, so we're going to use this example, and what we're looking for in this example is which of the three graphs. So if I look at, is concentration versus time linear, or is the natural log of the concentration versus time linear, or is 1 over the concentration versus time linear? If it's the first one, it's 0 order. If it's the second one, let me change my color to do this. So if it's the first one, it's a 0 order. If it's the second one, it's a first order. If it's the third one, it's a second order. Okay, so how do we do that on our calculator? I have some screenshots. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to enter the time and the concentration data into the stat part of our calculator. So I have some pictures of calculators. I thought it'd be easier to do it this way. So what you're going to do is you're going to hit the stat button. And when you hit the stat button, you're going to have an option, and you can use a more recent one. I'm using the older calculator. So after you hit stat, you're going to see the option edit. So we're going to go ahead and click on the edit. And when you hit edit, so hit 1 is edit, and you're going to come up with a set of lists. Now, some of you who are using somebody else's calculator, you might have some numbers in this list. So the first thing we want to do is we want to clear the lists. So you're going to use your arrows. You can use your up arrow and get up here and highlight the L1 if there's any data in here. Okay, and when you highlight the L1, when you go up there and you highlight that, you can hit the clear button. So after you highlight the L1, hit clear and then enter. And when you do that, your columns will become cleared. And okay, so when you hit clear and enter, it'll clear that column and you'll have these empty columns. So what we're basically doing is we're taking our table of data, and this is our time and this is our concentration. And we want to put in this column, that's our L1, that's going to be our time. That's our X. In L2, that's going to be our concentration. That's our y-axis, okay? So we're going to put the concentration. So if we're talking about x and y, now I don't like the fact that this is an x as our variable. So let me take that x and y out. I'm just talking about points, okay? Now, how do you enter? You go down into the L1 and see how this is highlighted, and then you can see down here what you're entering. So you're just going to type in your first value. So you're going to hit the 0 and then hit enter, and you'll see the 0 show up right here. And then you'll do the next one. So if you hit enter, you'll go down one, and then you'll hit 10. And so you're going to start typing in your data, 20. And so you'll be entering it on your calculator. When you're done entering the time, you're going to go to the L2 column. So so you can see on this picture, I've started entering all the data. So I have all my time in, okay? And then you're going to go to the L2 column. Okay, and you're going to enter in your concentrations. So my 0.0063, you can see I've entered them in, 0.0063, enter, and then 0.0052, enter, 0.00427, enter. And so you're going to enter. So remember, when we use our calculator this way, we're putting in L1, we're calling our time, which is our x-axis of our graphs, and L2 is our concentration. Okay. Now, once you finish that, we're going to go ahead and we're going to look at the graph for this. Now, the way that we look at the graph for this, so I'm going to jump down a little bit, and I'll come back up to these, just show you how to do the graph. I should have put this in a different order, but that's okay. Oh, I have a lot. Okay, so the way that you graph on your calculator when you have data is with stat plot. So here's the stat plot. It's above the y equals. So the first thing you want to do is you want to go in, just hit y equals, and make sure in the y equals that you clear all of your equations that are in there. You don't want any equations in your y equals that you might use in algebra. Okay, so just hit the y equals button, clear all your equations, and then come back and hit the second stat plot. Okay, so the second y equals, and you get the stat plot. Now there's 4 plots we can use. We're only going to use one at a time. So we're only going to use plot 1. Don't use plot 2. You don't need to. So when you highlight plot 1 and you hit enter, it turns this to on. Okay, so we're going to hit enter. And when you do that, you see that now plot 1 is on, and see plot 1 is highlighted up here and it's on. Okay. You want to have this one selected. That just means that we're going to have a scatter plot. We're going to basically be plotting points. That's all that means. We don't need to have a bar chart or a box and whisker. And then what it says is, okay, your x-axis, we want to know where is the data for your x-axis. So remember, we put our time into L1. So we want that to say L1. And then it says, okay, what's your y-axis data? And we want that to be our concentration, and we put our concentration in L2. Now you can move your arrows down and highlight these, and you can change them. And I'll show you how to change them later. But for right now, we're going to do L1 and L2. And then once you have those done, you're going to click Graph. And when you click Graph, you might not see anything because you need to get the window set up right. So anytime you're doing a stat plot, so stat plot just means graphs your statistical data you put in, you're going to have to zoom stat. Okay, and on my calculator, it's zoom 9, and I think it is on most of yours. So you're going to hit zoom, and you want to choose the zoom option that gives you the statistics. So it's trying to fit the window. So here's my data. This is my concentration. This is my time, because this is my L2 and this is my L1, and it's not linear, it's a curve. So I know that this is not zero order because my concentration versus time graph is not linear. Okay, so now we have to go back and figure out what about those other 2 graphs that I've never graphed before, right? So I'm going to scroll back up, and I'm going to show you how to use that data that's already in your lists. You already put the data in. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to take the data that's in, and we want to fill in our L3. We're going to try to put in this column. We want L3 to equal the natural log of our concentration. Now remember, our concentration, that's in L2. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell the column L3 to do the natural log function, which again, I know you don't quite understand what that is. We want to do the natural log function of the information that's in L2. Okay, so if you get into the L3 column, go up and highlight the L3. It has to be highlighted up there. And when you do that, you can see the entry line on your calculator. It says L3 equals. Then what you're going to do is you're going to click on this button down here, the natural log button. So you see the natural log went in there. And now I want to put L3 in here. So if I want to put L3 in here, you can see where the L's are. So you have to do the yellow key, second, and then the 3 button. And so I want to put L2 in there, remember. So L3, we want L3 to equal, I'm sorry about that. We want it to equal the natural log of L2, because L2, remember, this is our concentration of X, and L1 is our time. So we're trying to put in that L3 is equal to the natural log. So you click the natural log key down here, and then you click the second, and then the number 2 down here, and you get the L2 button, and that's what's going to go in there. Now, when you do that, what's cool about this is that, so you can see that I have natural log of L2. I'm going to end parentheses and then hit enter. And so I ended the parentheses. So there's your formula. L3 equals natural log of L2. And when you do that, it fills in your column. And these numbers in this column will match that table of data because that's what this column's saying. It took the natural log of the concentrations. And so that's what we just did on the calculator. Now we could go plot that one now, but while we're in our table, let's just do the last one as well. So we're also going to put in that on your table that says x to the minus 1. This is 1 over x, this last column. Let me scroll down. I think I have it a little bit clearer down below. Actually, I'll switch over here so you can see this graph. So this is the same graph. It's just on the original sheet. So when it says x to the minus 1, this is 1 over the concentration of x. This is the natural log of x. And this is, in the original, that is the x. And this is time. So whenever we do this on our calculator, we're going to put time in the L1. We're going to put x in the L2, the concentration. We're going to put the natural log in L3. And we're going to put 1 over x in L4. And then we're going to look at their graphs. Okay, so if I go back to the calculator here, in L4, so you see what I did. I moved my cursor over. I used the arrows to move my cursor over. And now I went all the way up and I'm highlighting the L4. The L4 is darkened. And so now I have my entry row. And in here, I want to put 1 over. So I'm going to do 1 divided by, and I want the concentration, and the concentration is in L2. Remember, it's not in L3. I want to do 1 over the concentration because I want 1 over the concentration of X. But that X, this is in L2. So I want my L4 to equal 1 over whatever's in my L2 column. Okay, so we'll go down to the next screen here. I have some blank slides. So you can see I've typed in 1 over, and then again, I'm going to use the second and then the number 2, and you get the L2. And then you hit enter. And when you hit enter, all these numbers will fill in. So you don't have to actually do it manually. So I hit enter. And I get these numbers. And if you look, you can see 158 matches the first one. 192 matches the next one. 234 matches the next one. It just did the calculations automatically. Okay, so now what that does for us is it gives us an opportunity to graph those. So I'm going to scroll back down past my original graph that I showed you how to get to. So we already did the first one. Okay, so here we are again. We're at the stat plot. So you get to this screen, you get to this window by doing the stat plot. So second stat plot, make sure whenever you do this, you first go in and clear out your y equals, get all your algebra equations out of there. Otherwise, you're going to get a mess. Okay, now if I leave these as L1 and let's blow this up. Okay, so originally I had L1 and L2. But now I know that that didn't give me a line. So now I want to plot my time as my x-axis, but I want to plot the natural log of the concentration. And remember, this is in our L3. So the natural log of our concentration, we put that in our L3 column. So if I put L3 here, then my graph, when I graph it, is going to be time. And this axis, my y-axis, is going to be my L3 list, but my L3 list is the natural log of the concentration. Okay, so then I'm going to graph it. And when I hit the graph button, I won't see anything because this data is going to be on a different window. And so I'm going to hit graph, and then I'm going to hit zoom statistics, zoom 9 on my calculator. And when I do that, I'm going to see this graph. So this axis, this is my L3. So this is the natural log of the concentration. And the x-axis is up here because this is in the fourth quadrant. And look at that. That's linear. Woohoo! First order. Okay, now let's just check. What if this one wasn't linear? Let's just rule out that it wasn't second order. So we're going to go down and we're going to change it and we're going to graph. Again, I'll blow this up a little bit. We're going to put L1, that's our time data, so that's going to be our x-axis, and L4, this is 1 over the concentration of x. So when I graph this one, my L4 gives me 1 over the concentration of x versus time. This is L1, and I'm going to look at this data. So all you have to do, you go back into this window. How do you get to this window? You do second stat plot. And then what you have to do is you have to go down to the Y list and you have to change it to L4. So you can look at the L4 versus L1 list. And when you do that, let's take a look at this graph. Okay, so this is L4, which is 1 over the concentration. And look, not linear, that's a curve. So this is not second order. And that's how you use the data of concentration and time, right? So we're always going to have a time, when did we check, and a concentration. Those are the two from the experiment. Those are the two that we measure. Everything to the right of that line, these are things we calculate. We calculate the ln and we calculate the 1 over. These two columns are from our experiment. Those are the measurements. Those are the data. Okay, and that's how you use your calculator. So what I would like for you to do before class tomorrow is I want you to enter the data from number 7, and I want you to practice making these 3 graphs. If you want to know if you're getting them right, they're here on number 7. Number 7 actually gives you the graph. So look at, here's your x versus time. So this is what we had in L2 versus L1, not a line. Here's your ln of x versus time. So this is what we had in L3 versus L1, linear. Since this one's linear, first order. Here's your x to the minus 1. So that means 1 over x versus time. And so this was what we had as L4 versus L1, not linear. And that's how we're going to figure out the order of our reaction so that we can start to use time data. What's the concentration at a certain time? Because that's very important as well in chemistry. So make sure you understand this video. Go back through it again if you need to. Get these 2 columns of data into your calculator, and then create these 2 columns by doing the ln and 1 over. So I'd like for you to come in tomorrow with this table in your calculator. So what I'm going to look for in your calculator tomorrow when you come in is that you have been able to create the table of data. So I just want to show you the table of data right here. So we have 4 columns and all the data is set up. And I don't want you to type the data in. I want you to put it in as a formula like we did, like I just showed you, because it will save you time taking a test. And then I want you to get comfortable with this stat plot. Make sure you clear out your y equals from algebra. Make sure your y equals are cleared out. And don't forget to zoom stat in order to see your data for each new window. Okay, see you tomorrow.